Yeah, my life is lovely now, I'm focused on me. You said you were about to die, I guess the car is on E. But see, I ain't even tripping, cause I just chose to believe that somebody gon' come around and give me just what I need. I don't wanna see you flying, see you looking down and out. Coming to me crying, saying you miss having me around. Gave you chances and you blew it, you so easily influenced. All the times you told me beat it, now you gotta face the music, I'm saying
I know that I gotta stay away from all your games, yeah. I know that I found somebody else to love me one day. You'll realize the grass ain't greener on the other side, no. You did me dirty for the last time, so now I gotta say goodbye. So now I gotta say goodbye.
Always do it on my own, so I gotta get through it. And the only thing I know is to love what I'm doing. Never give up, never slow, till I finally prove it. Never listen to the no's, I just wanna keep moving. Keep my head up when I act, head up, that's a fact. Never looking back, I'ma keep myself on track. Keep my head up, staying strong, always moving on. Feel I don't belong, tell my thoughts to move along. Push myself to be the best, die with no regrets. Live with every breath, see my message start to spread. And I had so many dreams, when you hit your teens, life ain't really what it seems. Try to find out what it means. Always do it on my own, so I gotta get through it. And the only thing I know is to love what I'm doing. Never give up, never slow, till I finally prove it. Never listen to the no's, I just wanna keep moving. Yeah, I put out all this art, it's my only medicine. Yeah, everything I do, I'm just being genuine. Yeah, I'm sick of being screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah. I'm grateful, oh yeah, able, oh yeah, I'm stable, oh yeah, no label, oh yeah, you know me, I have only the best. I'm lonely, but damn, I'm going to win. I want no fake love, I want the real stuff. Everybody listen up, cause I'll only say it once. I'm gonna show you all the path, if you want it bad. I'm gonna show you where it's at, yeah, how you can get it back. Yeah, cause I ain't never done, I'll be number one. Working hella hard until I get just what I want, yeah. Rises like the sun, yeah, fatal like a gun. Shooter's gonna shoot and I'm gonna shoot until I've won, yeah. Always do it on my own, so I gotta get through it. And the only thing I know is to love what I'm doing. Never give up, never slow, till I finally prove it. Never listen to the no's, I just wanna keep moving. Yeah, I put out all this art, it's my only medicine. Yeah, everything I do, I'm just being genuine. Yeah, I'm sick of being screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah. I'm grateful, oh yeah, able, oh yeah, I'm stable, oh yeah, no label, oh yeah, you know me, I have only the best. I'm lonely, but damn, I'm going to win, yeah.
my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in their cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything.
Uh-oh. Sorry. We're having a little tech problem here.
I'm good to go now, I think.
Okay, great. All right, so welcome everyone. We're going to be together here for an hour of poetry, art, and organizing as acts of resistance against displacement and gentrification. Thanks for tuning in today, and I'm happy to be here with you. I want to begin by also thanking the cultural workers who worked hard to make this event happen, the museum staff at National Public Housing Museum, and I want to give a shout out to Tiff Beatty, who is our new director. This is her first event with us. I'm really glad that she's with us. I also want to thank Jose Leon, the production head for tonight. And so occasionally you'll hear us, sort of reaching out to him, but he's sort of the invisible Wizard of the Oz making this all happen. And I also want to thank Breakbeat Creatives, our co-sponsor tonight. Tonight is really special because we're going to be together with poet and artistic director of Young Chicago Authors and the co-founder of Louder Than a Bomb, Kevin Coval, and also the artist and cultural activist named Langston Allston, who together with Kevin wrote a book called Everything Must Go, which is the catalyst for this conversation. We will also be joined later today by two extraordinary activists and organizers, Tanya Lozano from Healthy Hood and Jawanza Malone from the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, otherwise known as COCO. Let us begin by acknowledging the fact that most of us are tuning in tonight and we live on indigenous occupied land that has been and continues to be stewarded by tribal people in the United States. By doing so, I want to acknowledge the long history of forced removal and displacement in the US, from indigenous people to public housing residents to longtime community members and neighborhoods that are gentrifying across this country. These histories are distinct, but they are also connected through the legacies of white supremacy and racial capitalism. My name is Lisa Lee, and I'm the executive director of the National Public Housing Museum. For those of you who are not familiar with the museum, we are the first and only cultural institution dedicated to telling the history of public housing in America. The museum not only preserves and interprets this history through artifacts, exhibits, public events, and also a cooperative museum store that's owned with public housing residents and an oral history archive, but we're also committed to propelling the right of all people to a home and housing as a human right. When we open in our permanent space, we will be located in the last remaining building of the Jane Addams homes on the near west side of Chicago, as an institution founded by public housing residents with the belief that their stories and memories can inform our collective futures and help to address housing insecurity, one of the preeminent issues of our time. And without an honest telling of this history, the museum believes that we cannot understand and address other important issues connected to housing, like racial segregation, policing, public education, and public health. Because I'm a public historian, I want to begin with just a little history first before we start talking about the book. I want to tell you a little bit about one of the most heralded urban master plans, the 1909 Plan of Chicago, sometimes known as the Burnham Plan. It was a cocky urban master plan co-authored by architects Daniel Burnham and Edward Bennett. Like so many urban master plans, the fundamental focus of this plan was on places and not people. In fact, people are often in the way of redeveloping places. And so people become the collateral damage in the planning process. People are scattered, displaced, forced to migrate, and dislocated. It has been told that when Burnham was just about finished with his plan, he visited the Hull House settlement on the corner of Halsted and Polk Street, now the site of the University of Illinois at Chicago. But at that time, the heart of Chicago's working class and immigrant population, and also the area of the worst overcrowded and dangerous tenements, the most abusive factories, and horrific sweatshops. He went to the near west side of Chicago to ask well-known social reformer and peace activist Jane Addams the single unanswered question about his perfect plan. He went to ask Jane Addams, where do the poor people live? Bewilderingly as it may be, there were absolutely no provisions for housing in this ambitious effort to, quote, make no little plans, and to reimagine a rapidly growing city, which after all was a proposal to beautify and improve efficiency in business and commercial enterprises. This anecdote underscores the infuriating lack of attention paid to affordable housing by urban planners that continues to be one of the most persistent and urgent challenges for the majority of city dwellers. More than a century later, Chicago is now at the end of another ambitious master plan called the Plan for Transformation. The plan proposed a fundamentally new approach to public housing in Chicago, and it was intended as a disruption of entrenched power. Say their names: Robert Taylor Homes, Cabrini Green, Stateway Gardens, Ivy Wells Homes, Jane Addams Homes, Harold Ickes Homes, Grace Abbott Homes, Henry Horner Homes, Randolph Towers, Loomis Courts. This urban renewal represented the largest net loss of affordable housing in the history of the United States. Like so many urban renewal plans and so-called planned developments, tens and thousands of families in Chicago, and also cities across the country, continue to be displaced because of the lack of affordable housing in so-called urban renewal projects. And this all too often disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities. As the author James urban renewal means Negro removal. In addition to new redevelopments that are embraced all too often, do not acknowledge and recognize the art and the culture of existing people in these places as valuable assets to our collective humanity. And it's within this context that Everything Must Go was produced and created. So I want to join and invite Kevin and Langston to join me now in a conversation about the book. Hey, you two.
Hey, Doc.
How's it going?
Good to see you. Thank you so much for having us, and thanks to the museum as well and everybody who got us here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's fantastic to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so tell us first how this book came to be. Like, how did you guys actually meet each other?
Yeah, Langston did a show in Humboldt Park that some homies had pointed me toward, and I wanted to see, and I stepped into essentially what was like almost like a graphic novel come to life inside of a storefront, almost like an abandoned storefront inside of Humboldt Park that was reflecting on issues of gentrification that were going on in that community at that time, and police presence. And Langston could speak more to what he what that show was about. But I was beginning to work on this collection of poems and knew I wanted it to be illustrated. And I believe in that you should pay attention to coincidence and synchronicity. And so pretty soon after I saw the show, I'm like, yo, I would love to talk to you about this project.
Cool.
Yeah,
and Langston, you were in New Orleans also, but how did you get to Chicago? And
So I'm not from Chicago or New Orleans, actually. My family is from Champaign, and so I have a lot of friends and family that are here in Chicago. And it was hot in New Orleans, and I was looking for something to do, so I came to the city kind of to try and put together my first show that was, I think, me taking being an artist out in the world fully seriously. And I did it by like trying to closely observe and listen to the community that I was making it in, which just happened to be Humboldt Park because that's where people I knew lived at. And I kind of like pieced it together from observations and conversations I had while I was making it. It was, like Kevin said, sort of a collection of coincidences that resulted in it being successful and resulted in us meeting, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, and so tell me a little bit more about the book and what is your passion in it, what's inspired, and what are you hoping to do in it?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up knowing and coming to Wicker Park, because my grandfather was not born, but he came from the Ukraine to what was then an Irish neighborhood and became the Ukrainian village after he called all of his cousins in 1906. And a lot of my life revolved around that block on West Haddon Street at near Wood and Division. And as a kid, I started to go to parties in Wicker Park. That's where kind of an emergent indie rock music scene, but I wasn't really in the indie rock music scene. I was more in the electro scene. So they had a lot of house music parties and lofts that were kind of overtaken by groups, like teaming with groups of young people in those spaces. And, Chicago's fairly young hip hop scene was also gathering in those spaces. And so I started to hang out in that space and spend some time overseas, but came back to Wicker in 95 and moved there and started my career as a writer, just being encouraged by a pretty fantastic radical art scene that was taking up space and also displacing people who had been there for generations, but unbeknownst to ourselves. And so I think as a community of young artists, we didn't necessarily have the language of gentrification at that time. But then pretty soon we saw the neighborhood, go from a pretty mixed community, mostly working class Latinx folks, still some Eastern European folks like my grandfather's family in the neighborhood. But then over the course of maybe 5, 6, 7 years, you just saw the neighborhood whiten dramatically. And so I wanted to tell in part the story of that neighborhood as I saw it, and as I saw it change seemingly in a short period of time. And I know Langston was channeling a bunch of different things to get inside of the book. So I appreciated our collaboration very much. And Langston, I wonder I knew you've talked before about what you were seeing in New Orleans post Katrina and also channeling some of the interactions we had in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what drew me in was hearing you talk about it and recognizing the patterns you were describing in neighborhoods that I love, both in New Orleans and in Chicago. And wanting a way to tell some of those stories alongside yours. I mean, the patterns that you saw in Wicker Park are ongoing everywhere in the country, kind of all the time now. And it is allowing us to have the language to talk about it a lot more clearly, but it's also disturbing to see how pervasive it's become. And so I think that's kind of what drew me to wanting to illustrate the book and work with you on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you mentioned Katrina and sort of the post-Katrina displacement, which I think, a lot of people in the United States know is just so incredibly horrific about how the displacement people of color are thinking about it as a natural disaster, but it clearly is not natural. It's, unnatural result of white supremacy, of sort of the long impacts of capitalism. Can you talk a little bit about how is your book structured? Is it telling this long history of, sort of social sort of impacts or the stories of individuals? How is it constructed?
Yeah, I mean, I was, of course, even from the subtitle, the book's Everything Must Go, The Life and Death of an American Neighborhood. And I was influenced a lot by Jane Jacobs and thinking about her idea about the import of small space and small neighborhoods, and her writing about the Lower East Side and the East Village in the 50s and 60s, and so I wanted to tell the stories of people I was around, people who 20, 30 years removed from the place are no longer there because they can't afford to be there, and most everyone who I mention in the book has been displaced due to the nature of globalization, because the jobs left, and that it was kind of the forced disaster for neighborhoods in Chicago, and then very with great intent, then came real estate developers and corporate magnates who had a plan for how the city would alter itself and how the city would restructure itself, and how there would be the center of wealth in the Gold Coast, and that wealth would, like a European city, have concentric zones that would push working people further and further outside of the center. And so Wicker was an early in that process, an early agent of change, and I wanted to represent who I saw in that space at that time, because I have not seen their stories written down, and certainly the way that it went down, I wanted to record and reflect on.
Can we have a poem?
Yeah, of course. That's my job, and this is from the book, and it's called The Jobs, and it goes like this: the barkeep, the milkmaid, the pierogi molder, the sweatshop sewer, the steel worker, the automated lever, every day for 30 years, the furniture seller, the kolaczki baker, the concha baker, the butcher, the supermercado bagger, the paletero, the fruit cart slicer, the tangine sprinkler, the steel worker, the automated lever. When factories left, no one could afford to eat at the taqueria, the Polish diner, the ingenuitous pimps, the streetwalkers, the corner kids moving white, the white flight, the hood of hustlers overnight, the divestment, the abandoned carcass, the real estate vultures, the steampunk squatters, the drug den denzians, the artist studios, the coffee shop, the thrift shop, the storefront gallery, the used bookstore, the new restaurant with the tattooed chef, the music venue, the bar back, the bars back, the arts here, the arts for sale, the SROs, the single family homes, the nightlife, the knife fight, the guns patrol where guns patrolled, where 5 years ago the new homeowners wouldn't go. It's seedy, then unique, then boutique, the urban outfits, the cute developments, the real estate loan officers, the offices and officers, the internet tech startups, the flat iron, the artist loft space, the sweatshops, the whole floor, the Whole Foods, the strip malls that made suburbia, the jobs that made the hood obsolete, like the Iceman, cold in this new economy.
All right. Yeah. I love all the recognition of the different kinds of labor and jobs that make the city really come alive. And Langston, you were holding up sort of images. And so is there sort of an image with every poem, or how is the book structured?
Most of the poems have images. I tried to kind of read the poem and listen to Kevin talk about the situations that he was describing in the poems and relate them back to people I had met or places I had been, or things I had seen, and then sort of use my voice in that way to draw slightly modern parallels. But he's talking about things that are very close in time and in close to my heart too. So I feel it.
One of the things, Doc, that Langston, put in the book is, the Rahm Emanuel building the new Chicago signs that were populating all over. And, that of course is a fairly contemporary reference, given that the book essentially spans about 92 to 2001. That's kind of the time frame writing. But then Langston did such a brilliant job of incorporating, notes and modes of gentrification that are operating right now. And I think that sign, of course, like a lot of people, when those signs were going up, the question was, well, building a new Chicago for who? And I think, to your point, I think one of the things that we try to do in this book is also then value working people, understanding that working people have a smaller and smaller space in this city, and for the most part are getting deliberately pushed out of the city because it's becoming a city for the wealthy and uber wealthy.
Right. I know we've talked a lot about this sort of question of who has the right to the city, right? Like, so often the people who make the city happen, the street sort of cleaner, the people who are caring for the children, who are cooking our food, who are, doing the work of making sure the city is livable, are the people who can't afford to live in the city and are being pushed out and sort of not recognized. Great. Can I see another illustration, and then maybe hear another poem?
This is kind of to Kevin's same point about trying to modernize the conversation a little bit, or connect it to right now. So the police cameras that sort of haunt the landscape.
Hold it up closer.
Hold up closer. Hold on. Let me get right here. There we go. But yeah. We also just started having in the last couple of years those police cameras in New Orleans, and they have like face recognition technology. They've really gone a long way towards like shrinking the parts of the city that you can kind of disappear into, which was, people kind of rely on that in New Orleans in a way that the surveillance state does not like. And so we're seeing that disappear there too.
Right.
And Doc, I appreciate so much of what you said up top, and I that's as always you stay with the bars, and it was a beautiful essay, and I think you're right. Like at the core of this is what we're seeing played out now, and I'm really excited for our conversation later, because I think so much of what is at the core of this is the desire for white supremacy, or the desire, and one of the founding elements of white supremacy in my mind is the desire for monoculture, that everything should look the same, that everything should be in these, neatly tucked new modern single family homes. And that is at the cost of what makes the city great. That's at the cost of what makes culture great. And I think that this book and certainly the conversations Langston and I have had is about the resistance of that monoculture, the resistance of the terror of white supremacy.
Yeah, amazing. Can you give another poem, and then we'll bring Jawanza and Tanya in?
Yeah, this is the eponymous
Cool.
poem,
Thanks.
and the poem that concludes the collection. It is called Everything Must Go. We're looking for work, looking to move out our parents' crib to afford some affordable housing, a 3-bedroom with 5 people, something to imagine a life of our own making. We're 18 and 22, living for the first time with roommates not our blood. We're from the neighborhood, and the one over. This one's over. Our parents split and moved to the burbs. Our auntie lives out west. We work at the new restaurant your boss just ate at. We sold his kids weed out back. We boost and rack and claim our sister's kid on our income tax. We live with our producer, our girl's girl, a giant loft of squatters, our shit in a bag. We got the gall to think there's something different than life intended. We're tired of working at the bank or grocer or business our parents moved here for. We drink what the elders left. 7 and 7s, gin and tonics, old turkey and old hats. We're new birds trying to fly. We drop shit like pigeons damn near daily. Styles, projects, habits, visions of what it is and what it will be. We're making it up. We mash up records and tongues. We mess up daily. We step on E with speed to meet Molly. We out here, styling, glammed up, roughneck timmed and roller skates. We house, we rave. We spend whole afternoons blunted watching cartoons for aesthetic clues. We know the names of everyone who works the corner store. We're here to stay until the landlord says everything must go.
Yeah, that's good, especially at this moment too, when we're thinking about what's happening with the pandemic, and Arundhati Roy's comment about the pandemic being a portal and this opportunity to sort of just get rid of everything and the structures that have been so oppressive and create a new, I love it. And create a new. Sorry, what were you saying, Poet?
Just, I agree. And thank you for the space. And I think that, I think, I stay inspired by all the work, and I'm excited for the folks to hop in the conversation and the work that Langston's been doing in the streets. And, I stay thinking about the necessity to unfurl our radical imagination into the public sphere, because certainly this moment has been determined. It has been planned very deliberately. And so I think we need us all to think of a new plan, about how to engage and how to live with one another.
That's actually what I'm looking forward to in this conversation, is really to ask both of you questions, because you're elders, and really, I don't know, I'm curious about where we're going from here and what you think some of the changes we're going to see are going to be. I know it's not really my job to ask questions, but that's kind of what I was looking forward to.
No, you can totally ask questions, but are you kidding me? You're going to call me your elder? All right, cool. Let's get.
He's a young guy, man.
It's true.
He's a young man.
Jawanza and Tanya, are you there?
Hi, how's everybody doing?
I'm doing
Hey.
good. Great.
Nice to be with you all.
Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Tanya. Great. Let's start with Tanya Lozano of Healthy Hood. I want you to tell everyone about the extraordinary work that you're doing in Pilsen. And, I think sometimes we focus so much on sort of like analytical critiques of what we're against and what we're for. And I think something that's so special about your work is that it really recognizes what it means to be like a full human embodied being. And so, like, can you please tell the people who are with us, you know, what healthyhood is and, you know, about the work that you're doing? I don't hear Jose. I don't actually hear her. Jose? Okay, we lost Tanya for a hot second. So I think we'll maybe start and just go to Jawanza. Is it okay, Jawanza? Are you there?
Sure, I'm here.
Okay, cool. All right, Jawanza Malone from Coco, the sort of doing incredible activism work in Kenwood Oakland Community and rabble rouser, really thinking about how to organize that community. Tell us a little bit about your organization and the people you work with and what's happening.
Sure. So again, my name is Jawanza Malone. I'm the executive director here at the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. COCO, as we call it, was started in 1965, so we've been around for a while now. We started really working on issues related to affordable housing, equitable education, youth investment, and senior rights. And so, unfortunately, the issues we were working on back in 1965 are the same issues we're working on now. We can really focus on direct action organizing as our primary methodology for change. We are working against displacement. All of our work really comes from that frame, just to really address the structural violence that brutalizes Black and brown people here in Chicago. Displacement is very much an act of violence. When you think about the fact that nearly 300,000 families have fled the Chicago area since the year 2000, you know, is reminiscent of the 500,000 families who came to Chicago to flee lynching and Jim Crow laws and really the lack of opportunity in the South, right? And so they came north to try to find opportunity, and you know, look what we're experiencing now, right? And so the reality is, as we return to the South in a desperate attempt to make a living for ourselves and our families, all the things that we're talking about are really raising the question around equity and what is equity and what is justice and what is it that as human beings we should be able to experience where we live. And so for us, our work to organize people who are most impacted by this crisis, to demand justice, to build power, to hold elected officials and real estate developers accountable. Towards that end, we are doing a few things. We organize tenant councils as a way to really balance the power dynamic that exists between renters and landlords who often mistreat the very people who maintain their livelihood. Right? If you think about the fact that when you own a building, right, the only way you're able to eat is to have people who are renting out those apartments. But what our landlords do, and not all, but way too many, is essentially mistreat the tenants there. And so not fulfilling work orders, not making repairs, not making sure that the properties are free of pests and rodents. I mean, just a host of issues that are just basic, right? And so beyond that, we're also a founding member of the Lift a Ban Coalition, which is working to bring rent control here to Illinois. In order for us to do that, though, we have to make sure that the ban against rent control that was enacted in 1997 gets lifted. And that ban, is important to note, ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, was instrumental in making sure that that ban on rent control, right, that limits how much your rent can increase, made sure that they got that passed. And if people remember when George Zimmerman murdered Trayvon Martin in Florida back in like 8 years ago in 2012, George Zimmerman used the stand your ground law as his defense and was able to get off with murder. Alec wrote the legislation that got passed in Florida and other states that was the Stand Your Ground law. They were also responsible for the Religious Freedom Act, which Mike Pence used in Indiana to legally discriminate against people because of their sexual orientation. So this ALEC is essentially just a private club for businessmen in particular and legislators to come up with legislation that really benefits corporations at our expense. And so just want to also just quickly add, we're also a founding member of the Obama CBA Coalition that's working to stop the displacement of Black families in Woodlawn as a result of the rampant real estate speculation that's taken place there since the announcement from former President Obama, Barack Obama, that he was building a presidential center there. And so we're in intense negotiation right now with the mayor here in Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, to make sure that the 10,000 families who are at risk of getting pushed out of their homes get some protection. So I'll stop there and just make space for Tanya to come in. I think she's back with us.
Yeah, absolutely. But can you just quickly tell the people who are listening what a CBA is, just in case they don't know what it is?
That's important. A community benefits agreement is essentially an agreement that's often developed between the community and a developer to make sure that in exchange for some public asset, right, in our case is taxpayer dollars and a public park that has been just granted over to the Obama Foundation, that there's protections in place. And so for us, through a ground up process over 2 years, we identified 6 areas that make sure that there were protections in place. Those are economic development, education, employment, housing, sustainability, and transportation. And so for us, starting with housing was critical because, again, the second the former president announced the presidential center was coming to Chicago, real estate speculators went to work. And we saw rents increase, we saw property taxes increase, and we saw people being pushed out of their homes. And so we felt that we needed to act now to at least get that piece in place to stabilize our communities, because it was a tumultuous time. Redfin, this online publication that studies real estate transactions, for 2017 found Woodlawn the third highest increase in property value for every neighborhood in the country. So if you think about how many neighborhoods exist in the city, right? How many cities exist in the state, and the number of states we have in this country, Woodlawn was number 3. And the only thing that changed was the announcement the presidential center was going in this Black community. And so we had to deal with that first.
Thanks, Jawanza. Yeah, I think sometimes people try to make a distinction between the need for CBAs for for-profit businesses versus nonprofits that are there to actually help communities. But I just know as a museum leader, so often museums are sort of occupy, so much land in communities, and they actually end up being sort of just tax shelters for really wealthy people. And, they end up decimating communities oftentimes. So thanks for sharing that history and that work and for fighting that struggle. Tanya, you're back. Yes?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. I'm so happy you're here. Am I frozen? Okay. Can you actually tell us about your work in Pilsen?
Sure. So I'm the founder of Healthyhood Chicago, which is actually an extension of another program that I founded a little over 10 years ago called the Youth Health Service Corps. There's a 20-year life expectancy gap that has existed even before the Rona in Chicago between communities of color and affluent communities. It's actually the largest life expectancy gap in all of the nation. Larger than New York, which is more populated, larger than Detroit, where more people are living under the poverty line. And a lot of this has to do is, as we all know, how segregated our city has been historically and still is now. And so we started a program called Youth Health Service Corps in about 21 different CPS and alternative schools in underserved communities, teaching 7th through 12th graders about disparities, specifically about the 20-year life expectancy gap, and training and certifying them to screen for the 5 diseases that cause that life expectancy gap. And so we've trained a little over 1,500 students already in those 5 screenings. And as an extension of the Youth Health Service Corps, Healthyhood Chicago was born to provide the very needed resources and direct services that our communities needed to also combat this 20-year life expectancy gap, beyond just getting screened for early detection. So Healthyhood does a variety of things. As of right now, we have a location in Pilsen. We have another location in Hermosa. We're opening up another location on the south side in the next couple of months. And we have about 3 community gardens kind of spread out amongst the city. But we really focus on 3 things: educating the mind, exercising the body, and awakening the conscious. We really do believe like you need all of those things to have. That's a kind of our holistic approach to influencing the possibility of living a healthy lifestyle in the midst of dealing with the consequences of systemic racism in our underserved communities. So we have a variety of mental health services, fitness and wellness workshops, nutrition workshops, sexual education. Obviously, we have after-school programs for kids, as well as some tutoring and things like that. And the programming keeps expanding. As of right now, we've shifted into doing direct services specifically in response to COVID-19. So we've been feeding about 5,000 families a week for the last 9 weeks now. Wow, I'm not saying it out loud. That's kind of crazy. And so we've shifted into making that one of our direct services during this time. We're also shifting into the next phase of this. Even though COVID has not gone away, we're going to continue to do those services. We're going to start training police watchers so that if a police officer does pull somebody over in our underserved neighborhoods, we have people who know their rights, who could show up and videotape and know how to do that, as well as wellness checkers to continue this work of screening for the 5 diseases that ultimately are the killers of our community. As we know, COVID-19 is taking out a lot of people, over 100,000 already, but over 70% of those people are Black and brown because of these pre-existing underlying conditions. And so we're really trying to take a more holistic approach. Like, we can't just test people for COVID. We really do have to test for these underlying conditions. So that's really where we are now with our work. We're constantly shifting to meet the needs of the community. So we add on programs, feels like every other day, but that's what's going on right now.
Yeah, it's so incredible when I was reading some statistics on your website and other places, how your zip code actually determines your health even more than your DNA code sometimes, because of the segregation and the lack of resources. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to health and wellness as part of your justice organizing? I mean, I'm just curious about that. So many times health and wellness is a white privilege, in our culture. And I'm just wondering, how did you come to this work?
Yeah, so I actually was a collegiate, like I played sports my whole life, and I played basketball in college. And so I went to, it was just a D3 school out in Naperville. And I think that was my first time kind of seeing how blunt and kind of in your face the difference is in terms of health and wellness in Naperville compared to Pilsen, where I grew up. And so that was a big part. And then I became a personal trainer. So I learned all of these skills about nutrition and fitness and how ultimately it could help you prevent disease. And I realized that those resources there was no real profitable infrastructure allowing for trainers to bring those resources to underserved communities. And there were a lot of trainers and fitness professionals of color, but there was no profitable infrastructure that allowed them to bring it back to their own communities. And so as a trainer, that's really how I got my start. I just started training in the community for $5. At first it was just $1. I was teaching Zumba for $1, and the need was so massive that the classes were overcrowded, and there was not enough room for everyone, because it was really the only thing going on at the time. Obviously things have changed since then a little bit, not that much, but that's really how I shifted. My parents were both activists, or still are both activists, so I was always in the work of social justice to some degree, and so just finding my avenue, and health and wellness ended up being that because of my history and sport and just fitness.
Yeah, I love how casual you just sort of dropped that because your parents are sort of like the legendary Slim Coleman, Black Panther organizer, and your mom is amazing, Emma Lozano. And so, yeah, that must have been incredible growing in up in that sort of environment.
Yeah, I'm still here. I still live here. Sorry, that's my daughter. I still live here with them, so I'm still in that environment with my kids. We call it the Revolution House. You know, we all just like live here together.
You've brought up COVID, and so obviously I want to talk about also this particular moment. I was just in New York City in Soho, and it was extraordinary. You know, all the sort of stores were shut down and shuttered, and to protect themselves, they'd sort of put up, you know, boards, but those boards are now filled with the most extraordinary artwork, expressions of sort of, you know, the right to own the city. You know, there's just people, you know, painting at night with music, and it's actually an incredibly beautiful thing to see. And I wanted to sort of throw it back to Langston and sort of ask, in this particular moment, as a painter, as an artist, you know, what is some of the work that you've been doing?
So I've been participating in some of this like painting of the boards that people are putting out to protect their businesses, which has been more, I think, cathartic for me than anything. It's just like to have a chance to like get outside and feel like I'm contributing to the community in any type of way right now is good because we've been locked up inside for so long. And just like a chance to put some type of like color on these boards that are like really apocalyptic feeling when you're moving around the city has been good. But I'm really curious what's going to happen as we start to like take them down and try and assume our normal lives again. I'm looking forward to.
Are we going to see some work too? Maybe, I think.
Yeah, I think it's on the YouTubes right now.
Oh, it is. Okay, great. Yeah. So this is the work that you've been doing around the city.
Yeah. So that's in Times Square. I didn't paint that there. It just got there. But yeah, I've been, you know, anybody that's putting boards up that wants me to come paint, I've been like super responsive to kind of just rush over there and paint it that day. Delilah from Vault Gallery here in Chicago has been coordinating a lot of those paintings. So it's not just me, obviously. It's like artists all over the city, all kind of collaborating together to make this happen. And here in Chicago, you know, it's rare now that you'll like pass a board of business that doesn't have something on it, whether it's like the names of people like victims of police violence, or if it's just like paintings to make somebody feel good. You know what I'm saying? Like they're everywhere now, which is nice to see. And it's nice to see the city embracing street artists and graffiti artists for once. But I'm curious to see like where we go from here, honestly. How many of these businesses are going to be able to open back up in the same way, and how many people are going to be able to go back to some of the habits that they had to support these businesses. So.
Yeah, but it really does feel like a moment, right? I mean, it's terrible, the sort of murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, but I mean, people are in the streets and there is revolution in the air, and the mainstream sort of the police and invest in our neighborhoods and invest in other things like housing and education. It's really, I think this is a pregnant moment of possibility. Jawanza, can you talk a little bit about, you know, what your feeling is about this moment and the possibilities?
Well, hope is just what we live with. It's, you know, in the national is in the Black National Anthem, right? It is what keeps us going. It is what has sustained us over time, right? There always has been and will continue to be hope. The challenge is how do we, you know, realize those dreams, right? When we think about COVID, for example, and, you know, NPR, WBZ reported, and they kept asking, you know, for the numbers in the daily briefings that Governor Pritzker was holding. And so when the report finally came out, you had 70% of the deaths related to COVID-19 being people who live in the Black community, Black people. It was an indication to me, not just of the pre-existing conditions that may exists, within members of the Black community, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, that sort of thing. But really, to me, it was more about the pre-existing conditions in society that would give this kind of result, right? You look at just across the country in St. Louis early on, 100% of the people who had died from COVID-19 were Black. So how can you have a viral infection that's impacting everybody, right? Everybody's getting sick, but the only people who were dying were Black, right? And so, just going back to your conversation around zip codes, you got Streeterville on the north side, where the life expectancy is 90, versus Inglewood, where the life expectancy is 60. You got a 30-year gap, right? So a whole generation has the opportunity to experience their grandparent, their great grandparent. Whereas in Inglewood, you don't have that opportunity. And what happens during that 30 years in terms of wealth creation, in terms of being able to pass down legacy to children, et cetera, right? And so the point here is like, yeah, there's definitely hope, right? But when you think about when the Chicago Public School District moved to remote learning, right, this e-platform, you had Black kids and brown kids who still weren't unable to access the classes, still did not have the technology, right? That's now, right? After this heightened awareness that COVID has brought, this heightened awareness that the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others has brought. So this idea that this pregnant moment can bring change is really the change that we've all been calling for generations, that our elected officials, frankly, are in the way of. And so that's where I think the rubber meets the road, where we hold our elected officials accountable to pass laws and enact policies that actually help our community, not continue to traumatize it.
Yeah, no, and I think that's true that there's a lot of talk about this moment, but the organizing that has gone on for generations, and the sort of engaged scholarship of amazing people like Ruthie Gilmore, Barbara Ransby, Angela Davis, Black feminists who've sort of pointed out these issues that now are just so glaringly apparent that we cannot ignore them, to all of our perils. Yeah. Poet, what are you working on now in this particular moment as an artist and a cultural worker? Uh-oh. Are you there, Poet? Maybe not. He has his microphones on. Kevin. That's okay. All right, let's move to Tanya to sort of find out what's up right now for Healthyhood in the coming weeks, and how are you switching or changing, what you've been doing because of COVID? You talked a little bit about it, but.
Right. So we are going to continue this kind of food pantry giveaway. We have about 9 different pop-up spots where we do the food giveaway all over the city. But we're going to condense them now into making them bi-weekly so that we can start opening up other programs. We're going to put an emphasis on testing. So we're working with Rainbow Push and CORE right now to, what's happening is that because, I can't say it's because of it, but our energy kind of shifted from COVID to the issue of Black Lives Matter and police brutality. And the testing sites themselves actually just have not been testing very many people. There hasn't been a big interest on getting tested at all. And it's a very big issue because we need that in order to combat this next surge that is inevitable at this point. And so we are going to take those testing sites and show up to different places since people are having a hard time going to those testing sites. So Healthyhood ourselves will be a testing site starting at the end of this week. And then we'll be sending our mobile testing sites to all of our different pop-up sites. We'll be starting a free breakfast for children program next month as well. We're getting our kitchen up to code right now so that we can serve our children the breakfast that they deserve and hopefully start some kind of history lessons so that our students in our communities can learn their own history. Even if they don't get it at school, at least they would get it at our centers. And then again, like I mentioned, we're training folks to be police watchers and wellness checkers and develop actual relationships. It's kind of like the Cuba method, which is that there's a doctor on every block who has a relationship with the family members who live on that block, so that we know just what's going on and how to refer them accordingly and so forth. So, and then we also have our Get Your Mind Right program, which is a mental health program, which this is another thing that's going on during all of this, the pandemic, as well as all of this. Revolution is hard to be in, so you need to be able to talk to someone when you're going through all of this stuff, especially for those folks who are just getting into this kind of work. It could be like kind of like a shock, how intense it is. So we're trying to make sure that all of our activists and leaders and stuff get taken care of in that way, because that's something that we've learned from past movements that wasn't the case maybe, and that obviously was needed. And then all of our regular programming will start up again, hopefully in the fall, if COVID allows, obviously.
Yeah. I love how there's so much radical innovation and creativity, but also how much you are borrowing from history, like the Black Panther Free Breakfast Program, and also looking to other countries like Cuba and finding inspiration. It's really just an amazing mashup of, you know, how do you actually do the work to make justice happen? I think Poet is back. Are you back with us? Yes or no? Oh, no.
I think maybe, Kevin, they're trying to talk to you. Can you hear her?
Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I can't hear Doc. I can hear you though.
Oh, good.
Tanya.
Tanya, can you just ask Poet then the question that I asked him, which is just what he's working on now in this
I still
particular
can't hear
moment.
Doc, but
Okay, so you can't hear her. I'm going to ask you the question.
thank you.
Okay, so what are you working on right now?
Well, I stay working on new books, and so that's, I mean, I get up at the same time every morning and I write. I'm also working on some film and television stuff right now. And then, at Young Chicago Authors, during the first few days really of COVID, we transitioned pretty quickly to continuing to do some programs in the virtual space. And we're ramping up for our summer programs right now, which include a program that we've partnered with Doc on for years, a summer writing immersive arts camp called Write to the City. And we also have a 5 or 6 week apprenticeship program, which is a paid internship with 12 of our students from the 900 that are in Louder Than a Bomb every year. And we work with them during the day to kind of immerse them in the life of becoming a professional artist and educator. And so we're working on getting those things. Those things begin in July. And then, some of what I'm doing and some of what I think is incumbent upon me and those like me now is also, white folks educating white folks. I get a lot of calls from, white people who are paying attention to the news and maybe they haven't paid attention in this way before. And so, intentionally doing some anti-racist education work in the, various communities that I'm a part of.
Cool. Jawanza, if people want to get involved, they want to help, they want to participate in the work of COCO, what is a way of sort of getting involved right now?
Sure, I appreciate the question. We're old school. You can always call the office. 773-548-7500 is our phone number. You can ask for me or really anybody who answers the phone. Just say, hey, I want to get involved. I should note we have a mutual aid project that's been running the last 12 weeks. Where we provide a bag of fresh produce and a bag of personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies to our seniors. We're always looking for volunteers to help out with that as well, to prepare the bags, to deliver the bags, that sort of thing. Reach us online, web COCO online, KOCO online, all one word, .org, O-R-G. You can find out kind of what's going on, send us an email there. Again, if you have questions, if you want to get involved, and then of course, social media. And I think some of that has been shared on the on the YouTube channel. But at Coco Community, so KOCO Community, like Co Community on Twitter, and then Coco Connect.
Thanks so much, Jawanza, for the work that you're doing and the struggles that you are in. I really appreciate it. Langston, how can people see your work and find you? What are you doing?
I'm going to have a show kind of about this current moment and my reflections on it. It's paintings and drawings and stuff at Vault Gallery in Pilsen on August 1st. So I encourage people to, I'm not sure how we're going to do people coming to it yet. That's up in the air, but there's going to be a digital version of the show that's going to go live on August 1st. So definitely tune in for the digital show August 1st. And maybe come to Pilsen. We'll see how that goes.
Wow, great.
Yeah.
Tanya, ladies first and ladies last. Ladies all day. You next. Is there any last thought that you want to throw in there?
We always are recruiting volunteers. So we'd love for it if anybody's looking to volunteer. We always say at Healthyhood, every contribution is valued, not measured. So anybody's small contribution to anything, it's all appreciated from us. And so you can find that sign up link on our website or on our Instagram. The website is www.healthyhoodshy.com, and the Instagram is at healthyhoodshy as well. And the link in the bio, you can literally find everything in there. You can also request a PPE kit or a grocery kit on there, or direct people that are in need to that as well. But that's the best way to get a hold of us.
Thank you so much. The great philosopher, writer, feminist Toni Cade Bambara said that the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And so I just want to really thank Kevin and also Langston for making this extraordinary book that is put out by Haymarket Press, right? And that's where people can sort of find it, for helping be a catalyst for this conversation, for thinking about housing, gentrification, displacement, and all of the issues that it encompasses. I always say that in this world where there is so much unmaking and so much destruction, we have to value the makers and the creators and the artists to actually unleash our radical imaginations. So I really thank you for being with us here tonight. I want to thank everybody who tuned in for this evening's program, for joining us for this hour. Tomorrow night, the National Public Housing Museum also has a live Facebook event. We're going to use all the medias. And so if you go to Facebook Live, we're going to be releasing our next segment of a listening session of Out of the Archives, recordings from our oral history archive of public housing residents. And the theme tomorrow is Black is Beautiful. And it's a beautiful array of stories of narrators who grew up in public housing, talking about their lives. Black Lives Matter, Black monuments matter, Black history matters. Thank you so much for joining us tonight at the National Public Housing Museum. Thank you, Langston. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Tanya. And thank you, Jawanza. Bye.
A couple milli now, I'm causing a commotion. I've been coasting, hear my name around the world like an explosion.
We are the apocalypse, and a pair that keeps us floating. As we fly above the stars, the night won't scare us falling. So rise up. Way too great to be landed. Rise up. Way too great to be standing.
They are gonna stop us, fly by them like choppers. Better cut those risks, hold one of my fists, we fire starters. Let's go, one out of a million will reach those heights. Always had a feeling that I won't be now, that work, never been past. Look at my eyes, Yeah. Unknown Brain. Marvin Devine. I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming. It's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
I know that I gotta stay away from all your games. Yeah, I know that I found somebody else to love me one day. You'll realize the grass ain't greener on the other side. No, you did me dirty for the last time, so now I gotta say goodbye. So now I gotta say
Yeah, my life is lovely now, I'm focused on me. You said you were about to die, I guess the car is on E. But see, I ain't even tripping, cause I just chose to believe that somebody gon' come around and give me just what I need. I don't wanna see you finding, see you looking down and out, coming to me crying, saying